Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Earthly Headlines. Today we're going to talk more about tobacco and how it may have helped launch the agricultural revolution. So, archaeologists keep pushing back and pushing back the dates of widespread tobacco use and its use in trade networks and its use in ceremony. The further back it goes, and they're also discovering a bunch of other stuff that natives smoked along with tobacco. And right now, the snapshot is that smoking in general, as well as the nicotine plant and all that stuff, the tobacco, was used in South America and then gradually was spread up to North America. And right now, the oldest confirmed up until now smoking of tobacco in North America is 300 BC, which is surprisingly young. They found some evidence that pushes back the dates a little bit, but the real story is not how old smoking tobacco is, although that is really interesting. It's also how much of an impact did it have on people's decision making back then, business and trade, entrepreneurship. And how did it affect the day-to-day society, the people that were using it? So it seems to have been used by the indigenous people and people who have used it widespread 6,000 or whatever years ago in South America for ceremony. And you can see this with ayahuasca brew as well, where they mixed a vine and a plant, I think. They mixed two different plants. I know it's a vine, and I forget the other one, but then they mix it and they get this very, very psychedelic brew. And it's the same thing with smoking. They would mix tobacco, a bunch of other herbs that they smoked. Marijuana, I'm sure they smoked in some sort of combination as well. All of this stuff was a staple of their society back then, and it wasn't a recreational thing like it is now, like it tends to be in the modern day. It wasn't a business opportunity back then. It was just strictly if you have an issue or a rite of passage, whatever it was, there was a smoking or a brew for that. This story follows two anthropologists and two different studies that have to do with each other, right? So the first one is from Troy University. This anthropologist Stephen Carmody. And he explains that the origins of agriculture led to the making of the modern world, which is definitely true because, once people started agriculture, then they just start branching off into more complex things, and eventually you get what we have today. When you mix in capitalism and all these different economic incentives. So he wanted to find out what types of plants were domesticated first early on, and which ones were important for ritual purposes and which ones were cultivated for food, and what was the order of importance. And because obviously the most important ones will probably get domesticated first, right? So food, like I did an episode on corn. Corn was domesticated thousands of years ago from a grass that obviously fulfilled the need for hunger, right? And then which ones were ritual. So tobacco seems to fall into that category of ritual rather than nutritious, I guess, unless it's like nutrition for the soul or something. But it's a really valid question, and his methods are interesting. So first of all, they scrape blackened fragments from 3,000-year-old pipes, I'm assuming from South America, and they collected plaque from the teeth of skeletons, and then they analyzed biomarkers clinging to ancient hair. So with those techniques and those methods, he produced some evidence that is clearing up the picture, so to speak. One interesting thing to note in this article was there was in 2016, they conducted a study where a genetic mutation appeared in humans, but not in Neanderthals. So what that mutation did was it provided us the unique ability to tolerate the carcinogenic matter of campfires and burnt meat. I didn't even know that this was a genetic thing, but apparently we've been exploiting this for a long time, and it allowed us the ability to smoke, essentially. I guess people were smoking marijuana in the Middle East, and people were smoking tobacco in America. So the chemical properties in tobacco sharpen the mind, provide a boost of energy, can cause visions, and it was a staple of Native American society because they used it for guidance when they're living in the wilderness and as a rite of passage, like I mentioned earlier, to strengthen the community. And then the interesting thing is, over time, the Native American people used it for different things. And they used, like I said, a varied amount of plants, over 100 plants that they found in these pipes. A bunch of different strains of tobacco itself was also found in the pipes that I was talking about earlier. Some plants had way higher quantities of nicotine than others, so they would use that accordingly based on the personal preference or the appropriate dose for each person, depending on what they're dealing with. One thing that the study did not reveal was, how did that spread from South America to North America? That's pretty unclear. They know that it happened, but they don't know exactly how. Did someone bring seeds over? Was there was there some sort of migration back up that brought it back? They're not sure. So they went to the Moundville complex in central Alabama. So if you guys don't know, look it up. It's a Native American site, an archaeological site, and they uncovered a nicotine pipe, or they uncovered a pipe, and when they tested it, they uncovered traces of nicotine, and it dates back to 1685. So this pushes back the date of tobacco use in North America from 300 BC to 1685 BC, and most likely further back. I mean, it is the earliest evidence of tobacco ever found in North America, but it's probably not the first. I mean, we just happened to find a pipe from back then. If there was one pipe back then, there's probably a bunch of them. So it probably goes back even further. Same thing. I think the same deal goes for South America as well. I don't think smoking just popped up in 6000 BC. It was probably around for a long time. Again, that's a weird. The fact that our genes mutated to, I don't know if it was the express purpose to smoke, but it granted us the ability to smoke on a daily basis without any huge crazy repercussions. I mean, I know now people get lung cancer and stuff, but that might not be because of tobacco. That might be because of like the filter and all the chemicals they add to cigarettes and stuff. I don't classify modern cigarettes with what they were smoking back then. I think they're two completely different things. Although there probably was instances of lung cancer back then. I mean, there's diabetes back then. Just not as many people. I would like to see the science on that, but I'm pretty sure that it wasn't as widespread of an epidemic like it is today, where thousands and thousands of people die of lung cancer in the country every year. The interesting part of this new date, although probably not the oldest, the 1685 BC date, but it pushes tobacco even closer to a time when indigenous people were farming and they were domesticating crops like corn. The question here is, could tobacco have launched the agricultural revolution in North America? The first one, the one that saw all these Native Americans grow maize and all these different things. It's obviously they don't know. It's too early to say, but it's something worth considering as a next step, because again, they were hunter-gatherers and they made this transition to agriculture pretty quickly. And perhaps tobacco was an incentive for them to do it. I don't know how addicting tobacco is, but because I don't smoke. But I mean, if you smoked tobacco back then and it was so addicting that it forced an entire society to decide to just, all right, we're just going to farm this and smoke this. That seems like a stretch, but if that happened, that's really hilarious. I don't think it happened that way, but it might have been one of the incentives that, along with, not starving and not having to hunt all the time, which is really difficult. But it's an interesting thought. The second study was from anthropologist Shannon Tushingham, and she's looking at the Pacific Northwest rather than Central, South, and Lower North America. Which is a completely different environment in the Northwest. It's wetter, it's cold, not as much sunlight, and then there are different species of tobacco up there. So her and her team, they analyzed 12 pipes and pipe fragments that are a lot younger. So around 1200 years ago, like 800 BC to about more recent times. And they were trying to find the biomarker for this specific plant that I mentioned in a previous video called kinnikinnick, and or bearberry. They didn't find that at all, though. What they found was traces of nicotine in 8 of the 12 pipes. So it proved to be the longest continuous record of tobacco smoking anywhere in the world. So that, first of all, that really surprised me, because I thought for sure people were smoking all throughout the years, which they probably were, but this is like this is the first on record. So this made me realize that tobacco history is, in terms of smoking it, it's really shaky, because there's not a lot out there that they haven't found yet, or they've found a bunch of pipes and they haven't tested all of them yet. What they found out was these indigenous groups were smoking local varieties of tobacco way before European traders came. Because before then, they thought that the Europeans came in and took over tobacco and made it the cash crop that it's become now, when in reality, it was an indigenous practice all along. And the Western people who came later eventually just took that to another level. Because, they have a different mind, they have a business mind, they're looking to make money, and that's when it became commercialized, and that's what happens. So essentially, the Europeans spurred this transition from religious and ceremonial smoking purposes to recreational. And, these are just noob Europeans who got addicted, and they learned of smoking by these, after they established the colonies and stuff like that, and then they brought it back to Europe, and then it just became, the rest is history, as they say. It just became like I said earlier, a cash crop, and then slavery was built on it, and it just led to a change. So I guess the point of that the scientists are trying to make, and I think the point that this article makes, is if it weren't for tobacco, then who knows if that chain reaction toward slavery, commerce, and even what's become the end result of the United States today, perhaps it would have went in a different direction if tobacco wasn't used in that sort of way, if it would just sort of kept within the natives itself. And I think that's a really interesting thought, because all it took was one influential guy to get hooked on tobacco for him to set this giant machine in motion. And that's what I got from this. That's one of the things I got from this article was, holy man, this tobacco really was way more powerful than we think it is. Because now we just think it's just a bad habit. But really, it was a sacred privilege to not only smoke tobacco, but to do it in a religious, ceremonial manner among your peers in a tribe. So it kind of was used like coffee was, and they had cafes. It was recreational. I'm talking about in Europe. They're creating relationships, social lubricant, all that stuff. When in reality, it just killed a bunch of people after they put a bunch of chemicals in it. But that they don't mention that in the video. So yeah, before cotton plantations, they had tobacco plantations. Here's a picture of a pipe that goes back to the 1800s. It's a ceremonial pipe. So stuff like this is found constantly, but they've only recently taken the residue and tested it, which I think is really interesting that they've only started doing that semi-recently. So the next, Tishingham now, she's trying to learn what species of tobacco were smoked at different periods. That would be really interesting to map out on paper, just to see exactly what people were smoking where and when, and kind of compare that with other things that were going on in history, and see if the two timelines are connected. But clearly, the historical practice of smoking was much more intricate than today's discussions of legalization and prevention. In the past, it definitely wasn't like that. It was just, again, like a privilege thing. And I guess the next step now is to just find more pipes and from different regions and study them and date them, try to get really accurate dates and see what everyone was smoking, what they were up to, and what role did it play. Like, if they could get that specific, then I think it would answer a lot of hazy, it would answer a lot of questions and remove the haze from history, because the Native Americans didn't write anything down, or they very rarely did. And if they did, they didn't talk about what exactly the chemical composition of what they were smoking. They were talking about what they saw after they smoked, or the tool. It was just a tool that they used in their journey, and they would talk about the journey, not the actual. They wouldn't go in depth about the tool they were using. So I think these pipes, if I had to guess, these pipes have been around a long time. The act of smoking has probably been around a long time, and I don't think it's a new thing. I think to the Europeans it probably was new because it wasn't part of their culture. But the fact that 2 continents worth of people were smoking, and probably people in Siberia and China and Mongolia, the steppe people, they probably were smoking as well. They just haven't tested all those pipes. So I don't know. 6,000 years seems to be a pretty young date. 1685 BC is even younger. 300 BC is ridiculous. But let me know what you guys think about the history of smoking. If you guys have any insights, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.